debate on criminal justice reform focuses on mandatory minimums. The goal of these laws, when they were developed, was to promote uniformity, as the law and the law alone determines the sentence you receive. However, has this really led to a more equal and just system? Many people would suggest no. Hi everyone, I'm Jim Falk, President of the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth, and today we have with us Brittany Barnett. She's the author of a new book, A Knock at Midnight, a story of hope, justice, and freedom. And moderating today's program is our good friend, Dallas's former mayor, Ambassador Ron Kirk. As always, I want to remind you that you can purchase a copy of A Knock at Midnight at our strategic partner, Dallas's independent bookstore in Terabang. Go to interabangbooks.com and remember to type in that code dfwworld and you'll get 10% off on A Knock at Midnight, as well as any other books that happen to be in your shopping cart. I want to also thank our sponsor. Today's is Santander Bank, and Joanna Ridgway is a director, and I want to thank Joanna and her husband Eric for being such good sponsors of the World Affairs Council. Our promotional partner today is SMU's Dedman School of Law. Always want to remind you that you should be a subscriber, if you're not yet, to YouTube and to our site at DFW World. Here today to introduce Brittany, as well as Ron Kirk, is one of my mini bosses on the council's board of directors, and that is Joanna Ridgway. She is the managing director and head of the Southwest Region Mid-Corporate Bank at Santander Bank. She's a very active community volunteer, and we're particularly proud of her because in 2012, she represented Dallas as a Marshall Memorial Fellow for the German Marshall Fund of the United States. So Joanna, thank you so much for your support. Thanks for being a director of the World Affairs Council, and I turn today's program over to you.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It is my great pleasure to introduce my friend, attorney, and author, Brittany Barnett. I recall meeting Brittany on our first day of Dallas Regional Chamber Leadership Dallas, and Brittany, you have had a profound impact on my life, just knowing you and the work that you've contributed to our community. As the daughter of a formerly incarcerated mother, Brittany is dedicated to transforming the criminal justice system. She is a graduate of SMU's Dedman School of Law and has worked in corporate law in the corporate world while also providing pro bono services to clients at night. Her efforts resulted in freedom for numerous people, including 7 clients who received executive clemency from President Barack Obama. Brittany is the founder of 2 meaningful nonprofits, the Buried Alive Project and Girls Embracing Mothers. She has earned many honors, including being named one of America's most outstanding young lawyers by the American Bar Association. Brittany's work is the subject of her memoir, A Knock at Midnight. You must read this novel, this memoir, pardon me. It is absolutely profound and is a current Amazon Book of the Month. Her memoir illustrates how important it is for us to address the lack of humanity in our justice system. The conversation today will be moderated by Ambassador Ron Kirk. Ambassador Kirk is another Dallas legend. I could speak for hours about his service to this country and city. He is currently the Senior of Counsel at Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher's Dallas and Washington, D.C. offices. Prior to joining the firm, he served as the 16th United States Trade Representative and was a member of President Obama's cabinet. As you all know, he was the first African-American mayor of Dallas, elected in 1995. Thank you, Ambassador Kirk, for moderating this conversation. I'm looking forward to it. And thank you, Brittany, for providing your memoir to the world.
Joanna, thank you for that very generous introduction. But I also want to thank the DFW World Affairs Council for venturing out of our normal course of discussions on global affairs to have this important conversation with someone that I believe is one of the most important young leaders in our country. So I applaud the World Affairs Council and Jim and you for giving us the opportunity to learn more about this real giant of the legal community who lives among us here in the DFW community. As a kid growing up in Austin, Texas, like a lot of kids, I spent every Sunday in church. And I grew up in a family church. It was started after Jim Crow by one of my mother's 13 siblings. Very few of them had the benefit of a public education. And like a lot of kids in those churches, we recited Bible verses every Sunday, the same verse over and over again. And every Sunday, we started every Bible class every Sunday by reciting John 3:16. That I think most of you, at least those of you of the Christian faith, are familiar with. And about the time I was 13 or 14, I think we were just tired of the same old thing. And one of my relatives nudged me when it got to the point we all stood up to recite this. And he says, "Ronald, you know what this means, don't you?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "It means God so loved the world, he didn't send a committee." And I tell you that because what I talk to people about, folks that I've met like Brittany, what it reminds me is that God always uses people with the power of conviction and a sense of justice to make the changes we need in our life. I mean it with every fiber of my body to believe that one of those people is our guest tonight in Brittany Barnett. So Brittany, I am so thrilled to finally get the chance to be with you. Congratulations on the book, having been named Amazon's Book of the Month. As you requested, I delivered it to President and Mrs. Obama. They were thrilled to get it and asked me to send you their best wishes. And when he's finished editing his own book, the president promised that he'll send you a note. But Brittany, I want to start a little bit at the beginning. Joanna did a good job of telling us a little bit of the genesis of this, but like me, you grew up in Texas, raised by a mom who struggled with some issues, ended up incarcerated, and you begin your story by referencing a number, 1374671, and that sort of changed the whole trajectory of your and your sister's lives and got us to here. So take us back to the beginning and tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, thank you so much, World Affairs Council, Joanna, Ambassador. This is like a dream for me to be having this interview with you. I definitely stand on your shoulders of giants, and so thank you for that. A defining moment in my life was definitely attributed to a 7-digit number, and that number was 1374671. That number was assigned to my mother by the Texas Department of Criminal Justice when she began serving an 8-year prison sentence. But I always say, Ambassador, the significance of those 7 digits was much more than a prisoner number assigned to my mom. That number gave me a heightened sense of compassion and empathy that I didn't know that I had. That number brought me closer and proximate to a group of people who were often taught to stereotype and ignore. And those are people in prison. And I'll take it back, you know, I smiled through your story of the church. I am a daughter, a Black daughter of the rural South, East Texas, a town called Bogota, 1,200 people. And some of my most fondest memories include Sundays at church and just the gospel hymns, the old wooden floor shaking underneath, you know, and that memory and those moments still carry me today. Growing up in rural East Texas, I had an incredible childhood. You know, I opened my book, A Knock at Midnight, with a Nikki Giovanni quote, who I adore, and I say, "Black love is Black wealth." And they'll probably look at my hard childhood and never understand that all the while I was quite happy. And the crux of our family was just love. I had so much love from my extended family, my mama, As you mentioned, my mom had the misfortune of suffering from a drug addiction during my childhood. She was addicted to crack cocaine. And even through that journey, I still knew the love was there and unconditional. Growing up in rural East Texas, hearing about the war on drugs, but not really understanding fully how the war was impacting me in my life firsthand with my mom. And the experience of having a mom with the drug addiction was something that my 10-year-old mind couldn't process at the time. You know, you, as a child, for some illogical reason, you feel you can save the person hurting. I felt I could save my mom. Even as disaster unfolded, you know, my tiny arms reach away. As I got older, I realized I couldn't save her. I realized that she had an addiction and she needed treatment. But unfortunately, my mom had an encounter with the criminal justice system. And after time and time again of failing drug tests on probation, my mom was sent to prison. And that experience, Ambassador, just was devastating. When one person goes to prison, the entire family, you know, goes to prison. And there are millions of children in this country, sadly, who have an incarcerated parent as we talk today. But it's just something, when it's your mama, it's like a primal wound. And I remember, you know, that experience deeply, and the redemption of my mom and how she became sober in prison. And my sister and I got our mama back. You know, she served 2.5 years. She's been home for 12. She's doing amazing. She works as a drug recovery nurse at Homeward Bound here in Dallas. But I always say, you know, my mom didn't get sober because she was in prison. She got sober in spite of it. And she still needed treatment, you know? And so during this time, you know, I had dreams of being a lawyer, as cliche as it may sound. I always wanted to be a lawyer, even as a young girl in the kindergarten, you know? And looking back, the only lawyer that I knew, Ambassador, or thought I knew, was Claire Huxtable on The Cosby Show. And that is like the only lawyer I knew, the only lawyer who looked like me. You know, in my small piece of East Texas, there were no lawyers, and there definitely weren't any Black women lawyers. And I think for me, the older I got, the more my dream of becoming a lawyer seemed out of my reach. And I know it was just because of the lack of representation. And so while my mom was in prison, I ended up getting a bachelor's and master's in accounting and became a CPA and worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers. But always in the back of my mind, that dream of being a lawyer remained, you know. And so
let me ask you one thing, because I know some people in our chat. Who took care of you and your sister when your mom was in prison? Did you live with your grandmother or other relatives, or?
You know, my mom was in prison. She went to prison. I was a young adult at 22. So I was living on my own. But during her struggle with addiction as I was growing up, I did spend a lot of time at my grandparents' home, my dad's parents, you know, and a lot of that upbringing and advice and just wisdom from my grandparents still carry me today. You know, I remember going fishing with my grandpa in front of their home and just venting to him my teenage woes. And he would say, he would listen to me and he would say, it ain't nothing but a step for a stepper, big girl. You just got to keep on stepping. Keep on stepping. And so I just carried that with me, you know, even as I became a CPA and still had these lawyer dreams, you know.
Now, your mom, if there was a silver lining, I believe your mom was convicted in state court, not federal court. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So at least she was eligible for parole, and with her getting treatment, getting out, she was able to serve time and be paroled after 2 years. A lot of what inspired you as you continued this journey on through law school was how differently it was for those first-time offenders convicted in federal court. So you had this dream to be a lawyer, and just though you weren't that different from the rest of us. When I grew up, if you think it was different for you as a young girl, you've got to imagine me coming up, in the 50s and 60s. All I knew a little bit was Perry Mason. Thank God I knew who Thurgood Marshall was. But you have this great career as a CPA, then you get admitted, you go back, apply, you get accepted to the very prestigious Dedman School of Law at SMU. And in that, you are working on a pro bono matter that sort of really begins the transformation of both your career and the beginning of this story. So let's pick up there and tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So I went to SMU and was set to go practice corporate law. That was my dream. That's what I was going to do. I was going to leverage my business background for that. And so at SMU, I had a job lined up already at Winstead. And so I just started taking courses I was interested in. And I took a critical race theory course at SMU. And I was going to write my paper about this disparity in sentencing between powder cocaine and crack cocaine at the federal level. But it's so important to me to just not talk about the legislative history and the numbers. I wanted to show the heartbeat. I wanted to tell real stories of real people. And I literally did a Google search and I typed in woman, federal prison, life sentence. And here pops up the story of Sharonda Jones. And I remember watching her story. I was in the Underwood Law Library at SMU and watching her story on YouTube and just in disbelief that she was serving a life without parole sentence in federal prison for a drug offense. She had never been convicted of any crimes before, felony or otherwise. She'd never even been arrested for a traffic ticket before, and she was set to die in prison for drugs. And I was so heartbroken, watching her story, but her case just tugged at my soul. I saw myself in her. Here was another Black daughter of the rural South. She's from Terrell, Texas. And it was such a reflection of myself in the mirror. She had her own dreams and goals. And I just could not let go of her case. And so I sent her a card. I knew from my mom being in prison how important it is for people in prison to get mail. And I went and found an inspirational card and I told her, I'm a second-year law student at SMU and I want to help you get out of prison. And she wrote me back a sweet letter, just kind of like, all nonchalant, like, good luck with your studies. You could tell she had been let down a lot, and here's this law student that's going to practice corporate law and knows nothing about the criminal system that's telling her she's going to get her out of prison, But from there, Sharonda was incarcerated in Fort Worth at Carswell, and we just built a relationship from there. And I started working on her case pro bono, even as a corporate lawyer.
And Sharonda, but I think you told me also that Brittany, throughout the course of your building this relationship with Sharonda, I think you were also moved because she had a daughter as well. Is that right?
Exactly.
And with your own experience of, just all the emotions associated with you being the daughter, of a mom, in the system. That was a motivating factor for you as well.
Absolutely. Her daughter, Clinisha, was 8 years old when she went to prison. She was 18 when I found Sharonda's case. And Ambassador, I just know how hard it was when my mom did 2.5 years. I can't imagine if she was set to be in prison forever. And I formed a relationship with her daughter, as well. And we're formed a family, truly. And that was just a great motivation for me for freedom for Sharonda.
Well, we've got one of our first questions. It's interesting. I was getting that, and I want to thank you. One of our first questions, and you'll forgive me, this is the first time anybody's ever actually allowed me to try to navigate a Zoom screen but it comes from one of our anonymous attendees asking about your thoughts about the discussions around the restoration of voting rights. And thank you for that question, Anonymous. But I would say, just to frame this a little bit, and I would encourage you all to in addition to Googling and learning more about Brittany and her story than buying the book, so much of the discussion around social justice and criminal justice reform in our country now dates back, wisely or not, to the passage of the 1994 crime bill, passed, signed by President Clinton. Ironically, then U.S. Senator Joe Biden was chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, held court. I would tell you, I was not yet mayor of Dallas. I can tell you most big city mayors in America favored it. And one, there was a national anxiety to deal with what was felt the scourge of drugs, and in particular, crack cocaine in inner city America. But we'll get to the point, and I'll let Sharonda tell it. The challenge was that all of the things in the bill that would have helped people, there were elements in the bill that had money for preventive measures, for curative measures, and there were issues to deal with injustice and disparity. All those were stripped out of the bill. And so part of what Brittany's story is about, we had this very harsh disparity in terms of sentencing, particularly in the federal court, for powdered cocaine versus crack cocaine, and the way the laws were written. Someone like her mom, like Sharonda, like any of your kids, could be have one offense and have a life imprisonment. And a lot of that is driving now the discussion about the wisdom of that. So Brittany, share your thoughts on that in terms of what needs to be done, what you've created with your foundations to address that.
Yes, to address the voting rights question, we definitely have to restore voting rights to disenfranchised people, marginalized communities. There's news today where in Florida, $16 million was donated to pay fines and fees for formerly incarcerated people to help restore their voting rights. And that's just critical and crucial as citizens of the United States of America with this constitutional right to vote. And as you mentioned, a lot of where we are today stems from the 1994 crime bill, the 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act. And I just want to paint the picture for our viewers of this 100-to-1 ratio between powder cocaine and crack cocaine that was implemented in these laws, which showed that you could have 500 grams of powder cocaine. I could have only 5 grams of crack cocaine, and we would receive the exact same sentence. And this arbitrary 100-to-1 ratio had devastating, disproportionate impact on people of color. And it's not even up for legitimate debate anymore that these laws were embedded in systemic racism and we have to change them. And there have been reforms made. I am almost getting allergic to the word reform, Ambassador. I think we have to transform this system and we have to think transformatively. I think when you're reforming something, you're just tinkering with a broken system. And so we have to just reimagine what it looks like. And looking at our system currently, we have to be educated. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book. I think criminal justice reform is a hot topic. It's popular. It's fashionable right now. But I always am surprised at how little we still know about how the system works. And so I wrote the book to tell what I had learned and to really show how these laws impact human beings.
And also, and for the person who asked the question, and those you heard Brittany reference, it was former New York Mayor Mike Bloomberg made a commitment to donating $16 million to help Florida Floridians who have served their time, done that, but are being denied the vote now because the Florida legislature, subsequent to the passage of a constitutional amendment that restored voting rights, said that they couldn't have their rights fully restored unless they paid all their fines and fees. There are those that would argue that is the equivalent of the modern day poll tax. Thank Mike Bloomberg for what he did, but I also want to note LeBron James, through his voting foundation, and others are also donating money. If any of you would like to donate money, because there is a deadline next week for these fines to be paid. Full disclosure, I'm a trustee for the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. You can go on that fund, get a link to the site if you want to donate to do that. But Brittany, you made a point that rather than, as we as a country now grapple with the whole issue of not only policing and reform, that there is more of a need for complete reimagining of every element of it. I want you to speak to that more, because in your book, you tackle everything from the way we have used bail, and which bail basically only applies to poor people in this country, because wealthy folks have. And you talk as well about plea bargaining, which is anything but a plea bargain, and so many other elements of it. I want you to do that, but one of our questioners, just because we went over it, wanted you to talk a little bit about the class on race that you took at SMU, and explain that briefly for the benefit of those with us who may not know what that was about.
Absolutely. You know, there was a class at SMU called Critical Race Theory. And, you know, you can do a search. It was in the news a couple of weeks ago because people are wanting to get rid of that class, and classes related to that nature. And in this class, it analyzes the intersection between race and the law. And it really starts on the premise that laws in this country are inherently racist. And this class at SMU, it was a small class of like 20 people. And I'll tell y'all a really cute story behind that. The class was full. And I was begging the professor to let me in this class. I was checking the online every day at SMU to see if someone would drop the class. Finally, the professor gave me special permission to enter this course. And I truly feel that it was destiny, because that's how I came across this issue. That's how I came across Sharonda Jones's case, you know, a case that would change my life. And so taking this course at SMU Dedman School of Law was life altering for me. And I'm so grateful that the school offered such an influential course in my life, you know. And in that course, there was just a wide variety of opinions, people who may have not have been proximate to the issue of incarceration at all, because a lot of people are not. And it's another reason I was so determined to share the stories of people, you know. And Ambassador, you asked me about a project I'm working on now. I represented Sharonda Jones as a corporate lawyer pro bono for 6 years before we found an avenue of relief for her. Went through the courts and there was just no relief. Laws had changed, but they weren't retroactive. And as a law student and as a corporate lawyer, it was so shocking to me that we could change laws in this country, recognize how wrong they are, but not make them retroactive. And so I'm thinking, if a law's wrong today, it was wrong yesterday. But it still wouldn't allow me to help Sharonda get free. And so I realized the only way that she could become a free woman was through executive clemency from the President of the United States. Clemency is a power granted to the President of the United States through the Constitution. It's a sole exclusive power. And President Barack Obama was in office at the time. And for me, I remember just being my first year in law school and seeing the inauguration of President Barack Obama and feeling the hope that it fueled within me as a young lawyer to see this handsome brown family, beautiful brown family living in the White House. And it just gave, that moment of the inauguration gave me just profound spiritual velocity that I carried through. And so we applied for clemency for Sharonda Jones at a time when clemency wasn't cool. You know, it was before President Obama's historic clemency initiative. And once we applied, the next year, President Obama announces this legendary clemency initiative. He was going to right the wrongs to the extent he could of those harsh 100-to-1 disparities in drug sentencing as related to crack offenses. And that gave us hope, you know, and Sharonda Jones's clemency petition was pending for 2 years. During this time, I left Winstead. I'd gone in-house to Oryx USA Corporation, doing mergers and acquisitions, and just wondering, am I going to help get her free? Have I got her hopes up just to let her down? You know, time was passing. And, you know, it's hard because I'm literally helping companies move billion-dollar deals by day and working pro bono at night on these cases, and loving the work that I'm doing as a corporate lawyer and the art of the deal, and feeling like my thumbprints on the pulse of global power, and seeing how we can transform companies overnight almost. But I was unable to do anything to get this woman free, you know, who I've become so close to. And on December 18th, 2015, through the gracious and generous mercy of President Barack Obama, Sharonda Jones was granted time served after serving 16 years and 9 months in prison. And I'm just so
And Brittany,
honored.
you're being modest. I know you have a very special relationship with Sharonda, but for those of you that haven't met Brittany or seen her story, she also worked on 7 other cases, including one of Dontel Moore, whom you met when. You've got, and I think all 7 of them were ultimately granted clemency. Is that correct?
They were. It was once Sharonda was free, I felt the freedom myself to take other cases. And it was just a true blessing, you know, and I'm so honored, Ambassador, to have lived that part of history through this nation's first Black president of the United States, and just really honored and privileged to do this work. I'm so grateful for my clients for trusting me with their lives. I can't reiterate that enough.
Well, we can't thank you enough. And I also want to say, both for your law firm at Winstead and Oryx, for a lot of us lawyers who've worked in the corporate world and struggled with whether we're being true to what I call that inner calling of being freedom's trustees, the way we fulfill that is through pro bono. But I would tell you there are few of us that have the nerve, the stick-to-itiveness that Brittany has demonstrated and shown here, which is why I think so highly of you. But we've got a lot of questions pending. I hope he won't mind. I'm not embarrassing. But since you went to Dedman School of Law, and I'm just been blessed to know the whole family, but Bob Dedman Jr. is on the call with us, and he's just curious to know going forward. You mentioned clemency's a tough thing to get, even now. So his question is, if there were 3 things you could reform about the system going forward, what would they be?
Oh, that's such a great question. You know, my gut, just as a visionary, is transform the whole thing from top to bottom, you know, but being more practical in this moment, clemency should be normalized. You know, it's a power given to the president, it's a power given to state governors, and it shouldn't be this unique tool that's only used every once in a while. You know, it should be help to right wrongs in the justice system. And so I think some of the work we have to do is to make clemency cool, to make clemency where, as we're fighting to change these laws in Congress and state legislators that take years to change, clemency is a tool that can be happening in the meantime. I feel we also have to, at the outset, recognize progress this country's made to help with the criminal justice system, but make these laws retroactive. I have people that I represent serving life sentences today under yesterday's drug laws. Farrell Scott, for example, was from Dallas. He's serving life without parole right now for marijuana. And as he says, I sold marijuana and got a life sentence. Other people are selling marijuana today, getting a life savings. And so we have to really recognize just the truth about racial inequality in this country and how this nation's prisons are disproportionately filled with people of color. And I think we have to get comfortable in our discomfort of recognizing that truth and push for these changes to make clemency cool, to make these laws retroactive, and to really empower, as a social entrepreneur, I am pondering with the question every day right now, Ambassador Kirk, of how do we create sustainable liberation? I work through the Buried Alive Project to free people serving life sentences. I co-founded the Buried Alive Project with Sharonda Jones and Corey Jacobs. It's a nonprofit. We are working to get lawyers, to provide pro bono services. We're working to fundraise to hire lawyers, but as we free people, I realize we can't keep rescuing people from prison and restoring them to poverty. And so how do we create sustainable liberation to get people out of survival mode to help them thrive? And so that's something that I would help reform and change right now is creating sustainable liberation for formerly incarcerated people. One, so they have equity and a seat at the table. Two, so they're leading in their own liberation. And three, so they are economically empowered, and I think when people are in positions to thrive and not merely survive, it is good for this entire country. And another thing I wanted to get across in the book is that, again, when one person goes to prison, the entire family goes to prison, but it's not just the devastation of the loss of that person's freedom. I want readers to know that the true loss of mass incarceration is not just the lives stolen by injustice, but it's the brilliance and the beauty of every person whose lives was taken for decades and decades at a time. We are locking up so much genius in this country, Ambassador Kirk, and it's a brutal cycle we have to break because our collective future depends on it.
I would agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more. And I know we've got so much to talk about, but I also know you talk a lot about, and we're blessed in Dallas County with John Crusoe as a district attorney, but he started this work as a judge. There are things called diversion programs. And look, the challenge is we know drugs affect every community, every race, every demographic. And what I'm trying to get to some of the questions people have asked. How's this race? That it's just people, poor Black people are treated differently than a rich kid from Highland Park with a cocaine habit. His parents have the money to send him off to some swanky, rehab clinic in Montana. We don't have that, but instituting more diversion programs and dealing with, and I want to be clear for those of you that may think, well, Barack Obama just let all these people out. All of the people granted clemency were heavily screened by the Justice Department and others. These were non-violent offenders. So these were not people likely to come back and inflict harm on us. These were people dealing with drug problems. Brittany, I spoke to it briefly, but one of the other people on the call wanted us to talk a little more about the bail reform initiative they're hearing about and why that's important. How does that operate to the disadvantage of poor people and people of color? Can you spend a minute on that?
Yes, the work that I do primarily is at the federal level, and I've never seen a bail granted for a federal drug case ever. But what I do know about bail reform at the local level is that there are initiatives happening in Dallas at the Texas State Legislature to really help with that issue, as you just mentioned, Ambassador Kirk, that a lot of poor Black people, poor people of color are just unable to afford bail. And so there are people right across the street from me. I'm in Victory Park, Lou Sterrett County Jails, right across the interstate. There are people in jail right now because they can't afford a $500 bond. And because they can't afford a $500 bond, they're sitting in jail till they get a court date, and they may lose their job. They may lose their housing. They may lose their children. And I say all the time, it's expensive to be poor. It's very expensive to be poor. And so the bail reforms would help with that. They would ensure that people aren't in a debtor's prison, if you will, and not able to care for their families because they've committed a low-level offense. And you mentioned the diversion course as well. I sure wish we had that when my mom was sentenced, you know? And so those are just all important programs and initiatives to have, and bail reform. And I read last week in the Dallas Morning News about marijuana decriminalization. You know, those are all very important reforms that are necessary at the state and local levels.
Another one of our, one of the people on the call just wanted a basic question, which I should have asked you. Can you explain to them the difference between clemency and a pardon?
Yes, absolutely. So there are two forms of clemency. So clemency is what I call where justice meets mercy. And there's two forms of clemency. One is a sentence commutation that reduces a person's term of imprisonment, which is what Sharonda Jones received. And the other is a pardon, and it's full forgiveness of your offense, and it wipes your record clean. And so one of my other dear clients is Alice Marie Johnson, who received clemency from Donald Trump a couple of years ago. She recently spoke at the RNC, and she received a commutation from Donald Trump a couple of years ago, and she received a full pardon from him. And so that means that Alice Johnson is free. She's not on probation anymore. She's been forgiven for her offense, and her record has been wiped clean. So those are the two types of clemency.
Just for the record, this is the case that Kim Kardashian championed and got to the White House, but the real hero behind it is Brittany Barnett, who did all of the hard work and brought that case to the forefront. God, this time has flown by. We've got, in the time going forward though, I know you spoke about marrying your both knowledge of the business world, your work, you know, on the most sophisticated transactions in the M&A world and others. But one of the many things you've done besides Buried Alive and, you know, nurturing daughters of women incarcerated, but you also, I thought, have an effort to get businesses to understand, look, these are people that had a drug problem, okay? Wipe away the incarcerated. But these are people that in a world right now where, at least before this horrible pandemic and economic downturn, we're looking for workers. And this is a whole universe that can be recaptured if we're willing to give them the chance to do it. Because a lot of I would meet with, during my time as mayor, those who were reentering society and meet with the homeless, and I was struck by how many of these people had so much to give, but were just looked away. So talk about the work you're doing on that front to get business and use your business background to help people unlock the potential and value in those that were formerly incarcerated.
Absolutely. So I have the two nonprofits, as you mentioned, the Buried Alive Project and Girls Embracing Mothers. And with Girls Embracing Mothers, we've partnered with Texas prisons for the past 7 years. And we take girls from Dallas every single month to visit their moms in prison. And as I got even more proximate to directly impacted people by the system, I realized, one, nonprofits are great. They're necessary and we need them. But I don't feel we can nonprofit ourselves to a better and just society. And so I started to think of this sustainable liberation, as I mentioned, and how can I fulfill my highest and best use in this world? How can I merge both of my worlds? And so I started 16 Capital Partners 2 years ago, where so far I've been investing in formerly incarcerated people and their entrepreneurial spirit. Some of the most brilliant people I've ever met in my life have been my clients. And I don't say that lightly. So lately I've been working with people and business leaders to help invest in their entrepreneurial dreams and spirits. I've invested so far in a trucking company of a formerly incarcerated person. We have 3 semi trucks on the road right now. We hire formerly incarcerated people. You know, they're not just making enough to survive. You know, they're making wages and good money. You know, I've invested in a food truck of Sharonda Jones. She had a restaurant on Lamar Street before she went to prison. She's an amazing cook. And so we just invested in a food truck for her, and she's going to have it here in Dallas, and hire formerly incarcerated people. And so people are always asking me, how can they help? How can they get involved? Everyone's not a lawyer. I understand that. Everyone can't get people out of prison, but there's something we can do. And as business leaders in the Dallas community and in Texas, we can employ formerly incarcerated people. We can provide capital to formerly incarcerated people and their ideas. At Girls Embracing Mothers, our program director was in prison with her daughter in our program. And I hired her upon her release because I know she can do it. You know, I saw with my mom how hard it was as a nurse to not only get her license back, but to find a job, Ambassador Kirk, and how hard she worked just to prove herself, to show she was worthy of this chance. And I see it all around me. And like I said, as business leaders in Dallas, we have positions and opportunities to hire them, to give them a chance, and to really help them thrive. It's all about thriving and flourishing. And when we're all out of survival mode, you know, things just change for the better.
One of our other participants wanted your thoughts on the First Step Act, which I think Texas Senator John Cornyn co-sponsored, and it is at least a step in the right direction. But they were curious for what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the First Step Act was signed into law by President Trump in December 2018, and it rolled back mandatory minimums. It closed that 100 to 1 gap that I talked about to 18 to 1 retroactively. It should be 1 to 1. So it shows how it was a first step and a great improvement. It also included 3 other sentencing reform provisions that unfortunately were not made retroactive. It was definitely a great first step. You know, it's a limited piece of legislation that has helped free people. I've gotten people free under the bill through the Buried Alive Project with clemency from President Obama, and the First Step Act. We freed over 50 people serving life without parole, set to die, you know, and so it's definitely a great step in the right direction with so much more work to do. You know, again, there were 3 provisions that were not retroactive, and so we need to make those retroactive to reach back to help others buried alive.
Well, in the time we've got left, I want to thank you for sharing your story. I want to encourage everyone to read the book. Not only is it just a compelling narrative of a story of hope and perseverance, but it's a hard truth about how we treat people, one, that struggle with the issues related to drug addiction. But it is a hard look into the window of this country of how differently we treat people of color. We didn't go into all of it, but if you'll take the time to read some of Brittany's work, it's funny, as U.S. Trade Representative, and we are the Council of World Affairs, whenever anybody would ask me why trade's important, I'd always use the same statistic, ironically, that Brittany does, that the United States is now less than 5% of the world's population. And if we're going to have a healthy economy going forward, we have to do business with the world. In that same context, we're only 5% of the world's population, but as Brittany's taught me, we're almost 25% of the imprisoned population in the world. And that's just unacceptable. And then when you look at that 20%, 25%, and the disparity in terms of our percentage of the population, Blacks and Hispanics, and grossly disproportionate amount of the prison population. And maybe the last question I'll throw to you is one that just came in, Brittany. Do you think the existence of for-profit prison contributes to these disparities that you're fighting so hard to correct?
You know, I do not think we need for-profit prisons. I don't think people should be lining their pockets with human flesh. It is a billion-dollar industry. This country spends $80 billion a year, Ambassador Kirk, incarcerating people. $80 billion. And so I definitely do not believe in private prisons, but I also want people to know the truth about that and to know that private prisons only make up a very, very small portion of jails and prisons in this country. And so even with doing away with private prisons, we still have a massive critical problem on our hands, and we can't stop short of understanding the magnitude of what those numbers mean. We have to look beyond those numbers, Ambassador, and see the heartbeats.
Well, Brittany, thank God you did, and that you turned from what would have been unquestionably a very lucrative career in the private sector to devote yourself, as Brian Stevenson and we at the Legal Defense Fund, but so many others have done, to making sure that those that have been, in many cases, wrongfully incarcerated do ultimately have justice. And I meant everything I said. You are an angel on earth for the good work you do. We wish you well with the book. And for those of you that want to know how you can help, you can follow on Google Brittany. As she told you, you don't have to be a lawyer. You can help, you can support her work and others. But thank you so much for sharing your story with those of us here at the DFW World Affairs Council. God bless you. God's grace to you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I can cross this off my bucket list. Thank you.
And thank you so much. You know, I get to see Ambassador Kirk every so often at Starbucks after he's had a long walk, but he looks like he's been walking a lot. You look great, Ambassador. And Brittany, congratulations on your book. What a wonderful recognition to be book of the month with Amazon. And no doubt there's going to be a lot more accolades like that. And I also really want to thank our director, Joanna Ridgway, for bringing this to our attention at the World Affairs Council and for giving us such an important opportunity to share subjects that often we don't address at the World Affairs Council, and we should and we will. I want to encourage everyone that you can go to our website at DFW World to find out about upcoming programs and to support our programs. I look forward to seeing you very soon again, and have a great evening. Thanks for watching.